This evening's presentation, as you can read on the screen, is this concept of the minimal in Japanese art and sometimes a mysterious view. That's my subtitle to it. And I found this fantastic quote from Albert Einstein, who's unquestionably the man of the 20th century. The most beautiful thing we can experience is the mysterious. It is the source of all true art and science. So here's a universal man recognising that art is really important in our lives because he was such an amazing thinker, probably equivalent to Pythagoras. So I've used his saying to kind of connect, because I did try this concept with people who visited the house, and I'd show them a few pictures and say, can you drop a keyword onto this image? And they quite often came up with this word mysterious. It's sort of like unknown. There's no real hard and fast answer. So I've just noted here, this is the only screen, Leah, that you'll have to put up with text. The minimal is a way of visualising and creating art. It's a way. It's neither good nor bad, and it's certainly not the only way. So let me just clarify this concept, which isn't a difficult one really, with some examples. So here we are at the famous Shibuya crossing in Tokyo, and it's certainly a maximal experience. So for those of you who are mathematicians, you'll remember those hideous graphs that we all had to study, and there was a max and a min. Well, I kind of regard this as a maximal experience, because if you imagine each of those people close up, they are largely very busy moving at 100 miles an hour to their destination or heading home, and they're preoccupied urbanites. If we go to one of those exits of the Shibuya station, which is adjacent to the crossing, I found this fellow. It's almost a monochrome, and unlike the hubbub which is going on just adjacent to him, he's collecting alms for the poor. That was taken in 2009. I find this extremely modest and minimal, and I admire the monk to be able to do this for hours on end. I mean, my arm would be dropping off after about 15 minutes. But the whole act of shutting off from the world and probably meditating at the same time, it would be the only way you could get through the experience, is his way of life. And it's just so totally different to yours and mine. Okay, well, a useful comparison of this max and min are two building complexes. One's more complex than the other, and I'm speaking of Nikko here, which is a fusion of Buddhist and Shinto shrines, and it's around about 1650. And you can see here that it's opulent by virtue of the shogun, who raised the money, nearly sent Japan broke, banking and shelving the landscape, and then constructing a myriad of buildings. Some we're looking at, which is the bell tower there. But you can sort of see the closeness between the religious spirituality of Shinto and indeed Buddhism here, and the power elite. And I got to thinking, this is not very different to the royal family in London, is it? You know, like Queen Elizabeth, I think she'd convinced herself that she was very close to God in running the Church of England. And so the parallel over all of those years, I think, is quite profound. Now, at the same time, there's a princely retreat that's being built on the Katsura River, and it blends Shinto and Zen Buddhist aesthetics, which is a much more moderate and, we can say, minimal approach to architecture. and an expression of either the built environment, or it could even be regarded as an artwork in its own right. So it's definitely a minimal construct, externally and internally. And this is one of, I think there's about 5 tea pavilions in the Katsura complex, and it's a huge building made up of interconnecting pavilions that seem to seamlessly link one another. And what we're looking at here are sort of almost found pieces of timber. There's the woven straw mats that are referred to as tatami, and clay infill panels, and the mulberry paper, which is part of a sliding panel, not always, but mostly for ventilation, and they'd be within a cedar frame. Now, that's not a blank slide. I did want to make the distinction, and probably it's well known to many of you, that European minimalism, capital M, was maybe announced by Malevich. He painted the Black Square in 1915, and there was a war between 15 and 23 when it was exhibited. And he had one work, the Black Square, and he did a white square, he did a black cross on a white background, and he was exploring non-figurative art, as I like to express. But you know, I got to thinking about the Japanese flag, the land of the rising sun, a key symbol in Shinto belief, and that emerged around 700 AD. So I reckon, I hate to use the word trump, but I reckon the Japanese did trump Malevich by quite a bit. And another work of minimalism, which I didn't know whether I'd be proud or shamed by this, but when the Bombers beat the Swans, and I live in Sydney, I tell you, it's a great weekend. It's just because all the Silvertails love the Swans and they don't know one rule from another. Now, following the black and white tradition, black and red tradition, this is Trouty, who looks a little bit different tonight because she had an accident last Thursday, but she's soldiering on and she's here with a smile on her face, and I'm absolutely thrilled. And she's followed me and instigated many travel excursions over the 40-odd years that we haven't been married. So that's why I've called it The Bride. So it's a bit of a dark story. Another area of influence, of course, are your parents. Now, my parents were volunteers in World War II, and my dad was dragged out of school by his father, who was a photographer, at 14 to work in the studio, and he became a major, which I thought, you know, was pretty amazing in the war. And my mum was much better educated. She went to Macrob High. And she was a nurse who was actually on the Menunda, and she was disembarked from the Menunda, which was strafed by the Japanese. So the thing that I really want to draw your attention to, and my own, about my parents is that they were not in any way prejudiced about the Japanese. They never ever referred to the Japanese as Japs, which a lot of their friends did. And my mum became the president of the Ikebana school, the Sogetsu School in Melbourne, and she had a lot of very close Japanese friends. And I think, but they didn't kind of enforce that notion of understanding and forgiveness. It was just subliminal, and I'm very grateful to them for that attitude. And they must have lived through Australia's version of Pearl Harbor with fear and trembling. And I want to just remember, without going into it too deeply, the horrors of those bombing raids. So here's my dad in his early 20s. He's in charge of just a few guys, and he virtually didn't speak about that experience. Right until the very end, when he was able to convey a few details that I won't to you. But anyway, how brave were they? Well beyond my courage, and And I just want to recognise that tonight. For my 21st birthday, they gave me this book, which I still have, and I think it's got something like $20 on the front of it, on the inside cover, and it's now about $270 because it's a collector's item. So, interestingly, the author's Heinrich Engel, who's a Swiss German, and it's full of beautiful, beautiful drawings, which is what I really treasured about the book. I don't think I read it very much because it was almost incomprehensible. Now, I just want to show you a few of my favourites, which I feel are very definitely minimal in their essence. And I just noted here that we're looking at one of the halls of Toji Buddhist complex in Kyoto that many of you will have seen. But the snowstorm really gives it a sort of monochromatic, pointless appearance that I just love. And if I was to go back to Japan in the near future, it will be to return to Hokkaido. Hokkaido is just a magical part of Japan for the snow. Not to ski, just for the snow. And we'll see more of that later. The parasol, we've seen the flag, haven't we, of Japan, the rising sun. And in many ways, this is a symbol, a personal symbol of the same expression. And they used sun, rain, snow, and there's such an elegant solution to that design problem, which you can see here. So we've got a minimal artifact and a maximal sort of task ahead of this poor umbrella repairer and manufacturer. And I just love seeing the two of them. Of all the painted works I know of, this is possibly my favourite. Pines in the Mist, it has a Japanese name, but we won't bother with that. Hasegawa Tohoku, 1580, so very much indebted to Zen Buddhism. And there's a concept here of ma that I'd like to introduce to you. It's the space between the objects. And that space conceals, as I've noted here, reveals and suggests. And if you look very hard, you'll see Mount Fuji, my friend over there who's interested in Mount Fuji, Mount Fuji on the top right. So now the scale of this is important because it's about 1.5 metres high. That's making it over 3 metres long, and there's two of them in a room. And the lighting levels in the rooms of traditional Japanese buildings, let's call them houses or temples, is relatively low. And so this would emerge from the darkness and the fog and the mist and be such a, I reckon, surreal experience. It's indebted to Toyo's Winter Landscape, which is about not quite 100 years earlier, but Toyo's work is tiny. It's at the end of a scroll. And I think the scale difference, the sheer size difference, is an important aspect to make clear to you. But I do think it is a very early example of early abstraction. The implication of the mountain range, I can't help feeling it's also indebted to Chinese art. Bamboos in the Mist is the work of another marvellous artist called Okyo, 1750, and it too is like a stage of actors with other support staff behind. So you see very clearly the subject. We've seen the pines in the mist. Now we're looking at bamboos in the mist. So it's a similar construct, and I don't think it's a diptych. I think it's just a 6-panel screen. And you will have seen these independent screens for adjusting internal spaces in galleries in Australia, no doubt. There's just a detail of that. Another example of the mystery, I suppose, of an artwork is here by Hokusai. I don't have many woodblock plinths because they're very, very explicit, and narrative tends to rule, but I love the way Hokusai has confounded the lines of Fuji in this bamboo grove. I think it's just so clever. And he has a wicked sense of humour. Now, another lightness of touch, if you like, cranes in flight. Remember, we're in an era of zero photography. And when you look at each of those birds, they are connected to one another in flight, as they are in their flock behaviour. And it's just a handful of brush strokes. Just brilliant. This time we're looking at an overlay, a collaboration with a poet. And we see it here again. The poet is Koetsu, and he does the calligraphy. And Sogetsu manages with these such economical strokes to convey, that time-honoured activity between males and females. Goodness bless them. And I just think the energy of Sogetsu's work, both the cranes and this, and many others too, he is quite prolific, is truly astounding. This, Cracked Ice, by Okyo, whose work we've seen previously, is very close to realism. For everyone who's been to the snow, you've seen a frozen pond. In 1775, to spend time conveying that natural event, to me is just, it's tomorrow, never mind today. It's just fabulous. And a kind of witty little piece, The Traveller by Buisson. It's a lyrical cartoon or sketch. It could be in a modern newspaper, quite frankly. And it's very witty and just delightful. Another underpinning aspect of Japanese work, and you might think about it as we go through, is this, I think, very frequently used word wabi-sabi. Wabi more often than sabi, but doesn't matter. I'm not going to sort of nitpick about which half of the word means particular things, but it does, this concept does embrace and appreciate particularly the idea of transience, that we're here for a very short period of time and things become imperfect, both human and built, and they become irregular, and there's a sort of sense of austerity there as well. So it doesn't apply to everything, and I have toyed with this idea as I'm walking the dog, and I look at an old post which is covered in lichen, and I think, is that just a shabby old post, or is that full of wabi-sabi? I don't know. I don't know where to draw the line. Anyway, what I've done here is just to plonk down a Peter Rushforth bowl. Peter Rushforth was also an amazing Australian man who was a prisoner of war on the Burma Railway, and he taught Japanese people in Australia the art of pottery. He went to Japan many times. Again, an example of total forgiveness. The driftwood I took from a location that I shouldn't have taken in Queensland, but it too emphasises the idea of asymmetry, along with the gum leaves that I'm always fascinated with because their colours are just so beautiful, but they too over time change. Here we are in a garden outside Kyoto, and I think, bamboo is one of those deeply symbolic materials of Japan. The maple leaf too, the fallen maple leaves, autumn giving rise to winter, which is pretty severe in Japan. Leah mentioned a cemetery that we went to. That cemetery is Koyasan, and there's something like 20,000 people buried in Koyasan, and just the word stands the hairs on the back of my neck up. It's such a life awakening to be confronted by all of this death. Really makes you feel like I've got to use every second, because very shortly I'm going to be one of them or similar. But the thing is that they're not over-restored. They're just allowed to be, and that's very, very wabi-sabi and transience par excellence. Now, we're not all kids here tonight. So the idea of wabi-sabi and age and respect for age, I think, sort of sits very comfortably with me now. And this is a chap in Takayama, I've called him Takayama Gentleman, who had no English at all. And Trouty sidled up to him, and they made kind of sweet remarks to one another. And he very quickly took us into his townhouse, which was about 200 years old. And I just love this fellow. He's such a sweet man. Now, on the other side, we've got the International Forum building in Tokyo, which is made of very precise modern materials. Forget wabi-sabi. It's a different vocabulary. It's a different palette of materials, and consequently, an entirely different building. We need to speak of Shinto, because Shinto is the sort of indigenous form of spirituality in Japan. We know that Buddhism is terribly important. If you look at those stats down below, you'd have to say that 70% of Japanese are both Shinto and Buddhist. And that is true, that they use these forms of spirituality at various stages of their lives. But I'm inclined to Shinto. They hold that there's a life force in rocks and trees and waterfalls and in mythological figures. And so that expression we can see here, the giant cryptomeria trees are regarded as sacred. How is that regard expressed? Well, the Shimenawa rope contains the shide, or the folded paper, which in itself is derived from food which is offered to the gods. So in ancient times, we're talking 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, who cares about a couple of thousand years, these little beautifully folded bits of paper would have been probably animal or rice, in fact, for the gods. And we see that sort of same idea here in the weathered rocks at Futami. This time the Shimenawa is much heavier, and you can see the little tori on the top of that rock. So just point that out to you. I pointed it out to myself. And it, in a way, is, I see it as calligraphic. There are 4 strokes here, 2 verticals and 2 horizontals, and that marks the transition between the profane, the secular world and the sacred. And I've said here they're gateless gates, which is, I think, a beautiful way to describe them. But the gateless gate's actually a Buddhist koan. And it's interesting how these 2 forms of spirituality live side by side, at least today, in total harmony. There's a scale issue here. Look how big that imperial tori is. But you'll find them all over the country, made of timber, of stone, and these days very frequently out of concrete. But I'm very fond of that image. Fushimi Inari is just 2 train stops out of Kyoto, and you find thousands and thousands of these gateways, which I suspect are funded by families who can afford to do so, and they're a way of remembering those who've passed on. But it really is an amazing experience. My first time, it was misty and verging on rain, and there were crows calling. Remember, the crow is the emissary of the gods, and I'm kind of going, and I was on my own. I thought, wow, this is just a treasure forever, and I'm really glad to tell you about it. So the torii isn't the only part of the Shinto complex, of course. In early times, pre-500, Shinto buildings were very rudimentary, and they latched onto the Buddhist pantheon of or programs of buildings very quickly. And so whilst that may appear to be Buddhist, it's actually Shinto. Like all good Instagram followers, they love to get married in Shinto precincts. This was actually in the Imperial Gardens in Tokyo. And I must say that lady was one of the most lovely I've ever seen in my life. Like many religions or sort of forces of spirituality, Shinto was taken up by the imperial family. That's a sketch of the complex at Ise. And as an architecture student, I'd never understood this, that you can spend a lot of time walking around this complex and you can never get anywhere near it because it's imperial and you stay where you belong. So that's what it looks like, but we've seen processions like this recently, haven't we? They're in a sort of slightly different colourway. But these are the priests who are presiding over a ceremony that would involve the emperor. And the emperor visits. This is the most sacred Shinto place in Japan. So just think about it, again, Westminster Cathedral. The scale, the materials, the permanence, the impermanence are all opposite. So it really is a fantastic place to visit because everything really is different. I got to thinking about haiku, and I've never really been that, I have to confess this, I've never really been that interested in poetry. But boy, did I get into haiku when I started to, dig underneath it. And it's said that Basho is perhaps the most profound and prolific of the haiku exponents. This painting may or may not look like him. I can't tell. But I've just got a few here for you to contemplate. This is said to be the most famous piece of haiku in the world. How you can make one more famous than the other, I have no idea. An ancient pool, a frog jumps in, the sound of water. So what we have is the stillness of nature. The pond probably has some very still water lilies, as we can see there. Then the frog decides to jump in, he makes a plop, and he disturbs that for a moment. And we realise that life's changing. So there's a profound sort of philosophy that's driving these artists. This is a picture that Trouty and I photographed in our little courtyard in Avalon. It's a black prince, but it was dead. And at the time, the cicadas were shrill. It happens, I'm sure in Melbourne it does happen, yeah. So there's screaming cicadas and this little fellow was dead. So I thought, I remember there was one haiku about cicadas. Deep silence, the shrill of cicadas seeps into rocks. So the rock came from the pond. The background was a support for an umbrella. We popped the Black Prince's carcass on top, and I thought it was just a beautiful illustration of the idea of deep silence, death, the shrill of cicadas, life, and the carcass will seep into the rocks. I just find it so profound. But they're not all serious. Basho writes, "Come, let's go snow viewing till we're buried." Like, that's wacky. That's Niseko. And I mentioned that the crow or the raven is an emissary of the gods, and I found Basho would beat me to it. On a pine's bough, a crow alone is perching winter's evening snow. And it's still, and the raven or the crow is sitting there. I'm rushing for my camera. Will he go? Will he fly away? No, he stayed there for me. Fantastic. One of those moments. Don't weep, insects. Lovers, stars themselves must part. That's Issa. Issa's a very profound haiku exponent also. I'm not sure if I just wanted to show you this picture that I took out of a bus or what. But anyway, see the river flow in a long unbroken line on a field of snow. So is Bonsai alerting us to a feature of the landscape, or is he drawing us into the one? And I suspect the latter is true. But as I was photographing it, there were ducks sort of paddling around in the icy waters below. And this is a kind of sad one, really. Through snow, lights of homes that slam their gates on me. That's Buson. So he's a pilgrim in the snow, and he's feeling rejected because I guess, see, we're talking about a time of bandits. I mean, not everything is beautiful and harmonious in Japan. They were engaged in civil wars and external wars for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And this is a funny one too. Living in the town, one must have money even to melt snow down. And I saw these mad Australian skiers sort of sitting around in the snow drinking cold beer. I thought, that's insane, and it kind of goes with the poetry. I love this one too. "O leaves, ask the breeze, which of you will scatter first from the verdant trees." I mean, there's an element of the absurd in some haiku poems. And this is absurdity, but it's profound at the same time. "My 10-foot bamboo hut this spring. There is nothing, there is everything." I think Charlie will really love that one, by Sodo, and Morakagi is the painter. And I've used this image in other lectures, and it truly is intimate, modest, and just such a good summary, I think, of the importance of haiku. The traditional Japanese house is also, in its best cases, an expression of the minimal. Lao Tzu said, "Walls and doors form the house." Yep, but the empty space within, maybe the ma, is the essence of the house. So I'm going to run through just 4 types quickly. I know I'm not talking to architecture students, and I don't wish you to think that that's the way I'm treating you. But if we start from the most basic, the simple ancient dwelling forms, one's a pit form, the other evolves from it. And you can see these buildings in reconstructed villages in Japan, which is really lovely because it takes you to the essence of that time, 3000 BC. It's a very beautiful thing that gets elevated. The A-frame gets elevated up until about 300, and I guess, as in mountain countries like Switzerland, there'd be stock underneath and a more comfortable regime above. But still very elegant, and the post and frame with infill panel is the signature of everything that goes beyond. A drink coaster, 2009. And why did I photograph that at Ogimachi? Because there's the house form. And it's very close to that ancient dwelling. with the thick, steep thatched roof. They look like a collection of lanterns in the landscape from that point of view. And let's take you inside. Your hosts will smoke fish for you over the fire pit, which looks perilously dangerous to me, but they know how to control the fire so that it's not a roaring one as we're familiar with. And the food is laid out. The screens can be open or closed. They're a double layer of both shoji screen and storm shutter. And you can see this beautiful array of tatami mats here, which are, just for scale, they're about 1 metre by 2 metres. So that you can pick them up, move them around, dry them out, rearrange them if you so choose. And here we've got this lovely little sketch reminding us that the tatami mat's been around for well over 1,000 years. I guess it gets refined, and it is extremely refined these days, also very, very expensive. And you might wonder how these fellas are paddling around with bare feet, because they're so civilised they leave their shoes, their day shoes, off, and they make the floor even better if it's a timber floor, because their stockinged feet just makes the patina of the pine boards or the cedar boards that much more beautiful. And it's also a nice way to say to tourists, take your shoes off. They don't have a big sign saying, take your shoes off. They just, it's very subtle. The construction of these buildings, and we're actually looking at a working drawing of a shrine, but nevertheless the construction type is similar. You can see the hard labour that goes into it, and that the construction methods, which are standardised, are certainly not minimal. The final building might be, but as we've seen in the past, the detailing of this is like a Chinese puzzle. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. But Charles's son is well across all of that. And I used to get students to make models of these as an assignment. So that really sort of sent them into tailspins. Let's look at, I think, the second last house, which is the merchant's house. So this is in the city, something of the order of 200 years old. And this is the house that Trouty gained entrance to in Takayama. And you can see that, or you can imagine that trading could take place in there, and goods were stored on an upper level. The massive timber construction was what intrigued me. And for a final example, the samurai warrior's house, this is in Kanazawa, and you can see the status of the samurai warrior at this stage. There's, gorgeous interiors with fusuma, that's the interior screen that can adjust the spatial configuration of the interior, is painted with all kinds of, mostly examples from nature. Windflowers or chrysanthemum or whoever was the prevailing shogun at the time. So you can see there the fantastic flexibility and adjustability of this interior, almost like a piece of joinery. You can take out a drawer, you can turn it round, you can do all of those things. And this exquisite, no doubt affluent interior, where the tokonoma, the recess in this visitor's room, has a beautiful piece of pottery, and it may have been focused on a bonsai or ikebana, essentially for meditative purposes. So you would just sit in front of that and think whatever your thoughts were. And I think one of the appealing things to Australians is the relationship between the garden and the internal spaces. So once again, the external wall is adjustable with these screens. The shoji screen, you can't see any storm shutters there, with these elaborate, intense, experiential gardens. Now, I can whip through this fairly quickly because I have no idea how we're going for time, but I'm lost in space here. We know pretty much that bonsai came from Japan, and it was an imperial device that the emperor carried with him to remind him of his domain. So it was a miniaturization of territory. I have to say before I show you these pictures that I'm not really a bonsai person in the traditional sense. I've done a lot of work for a Japanese lady called Megumi Bennett, who runs an organisation called Bonsai Art. She's very, very highly respected in Sydney, and I've done lots and lots of photography for her. And I keep saying, Megumi, don't ask me whether you should cut it. I'm a cowboy, I just do it, or not. So we have a very funny working relationship, because her knowledge of the spiritual side of bonsai and ikebana is profound. But these are just little examples that I have at home. Water iris, which has got a beautiful yellow flower. Victoria, I hope, has still got a couple of those. And these succulent ground cover. But it's only a tiny little thing. My sister loves flowering bonsais, and she lives in New Zealand, so I send her these sort of photos, and she said, oh, that's just a weed. And in New Zealand, it's called a golden dewdrop. She knows what the botanical name is. But I said, I don't mind, I just think it's really fantastic. The wisteria, don't ever let it out of a pot, here flowering at home. And here's a weed that Victoria will also be familiar with. It's the foxtail. It's a dreaded bloody plant in the Northern Beaches area, but for some years I trained this little beast to do these things, and it's gone to God. But I think it's just such a beautiful shape, you know, it's just flying away. I'm not sure if this is a bonsai, it's probably an overplanted pot. But it is a little Japanese pot, and I love those bromeliads. People know that I'm interested in bonsai, and we were given, or I was given, these little seedlings from a country town where the lady had taken them from the bank of a creek on her property, and that's sort of how they arrived, and that's how one transformed itself over several years, probably about 5 years. And now that would be beyond the circle of gold behind it, which is just a light reflector for photographs. And I thought, oh, that looks all right, I'll keep it. So if you're going to start bonsais, start with figs. It's a good idea. They're indestructible, basically, although I did give one to a person who killed it, but this must be a remarkable exercise. Probably a Port Jackson fig, and that's a detail of it. So I find these things are like kids. You've got to water them, repot them, if you know what I mean, and take great care of them. They're a sort of not an everyday task, but certainly several times a week. And I've had many deaths. This is me playing around with a bit of photography and filtration. Or Photoshop actually, but it's an olive, and I did it because I love the way the olive leaf is light on the underside and dark on the top side. So I kind of made it float, to my mind. So let's now go from the minuscule, if you like, although there are some very large bonsais. I was having a discussion earlier about when does a bonsai become a tree in a big pot. On the other way around, you can imagine. So Zen gave rise to these gravel gardens, and they're said to be miniaturized landscapes of hills and ravines and plants without plants, but they're also essentially meditative. Very, very clever in that the subject of meditation, the rocks, you can regard as sculpture. Although I think I said something about no theatre there. The actors don't really move around, do they? But they're contained by this external frame on two sides with a viewing platform on a third and the access on the fourth. So these days, if you go to Ryoanji, which is said to be the epitome of sansui or gravel gardens, you'll be lucky to have a day with just a handful of people like that, wondering what they should look at, because there's a lot of background to the participation, the spiritual participation of these rocks that I do not understand. The achievement of this is kind of miraculous, and amazing patterns are formed, and it is mesmeric. But in Koyasan, the Buddhist residents also had this gravel garden, and so you can find them in many places in Japan without loads of school kids, and I would encourage you to do that. But, you know, Ryoanji on a good day is absolutely fabulous. When I was running this talk through with Trouty, she said to me, when are you going to get to the real stuff? And she was thinking that this had to be about the modern world. So what I want to say about the modern world is that it does, in Japan, coexist with the traditional. So here we are in Kanazawa with 3 generations of women who don't know they're being photographed. Kazuo Sujima of Sana did the scheme, and I have to say I didn't like it at all when I saw it in 2009. I thought, is this about an art gallery, or is this kind of like a viewing platform for an architect to demonstrate that they're really minimalist practitioners? Charlie tells me it's much better curated now, and I accept that that's a possibility. But I remember when I was teaching art gallery design to students, I said there's 2 things to avoid. One's a curved wall because you can't hang a painting on it, and 2, a curved glass wall would be the pits. And here it is. And she's being lauded by it, so I don't know, I probably destroyed the brain cells of many architecture students en route. In terms of the modern world, Noguchi is one of my heroes. Noguchi had a very, what we would describe as probably a traumatic childhood. His mum was Irish and his dad was Japanese, and if you look up the internet, he'll be described as an itinerant poet, which is a real put down. But he did live with many families because Dad was probably as good looking as the son. And Noguchi he's an industrial designer, he's a sculptor, he's a landscape architect, and Trouty found that he was a furniture designer at very close quarters when she tripped up and banged into the table edge. So this is said to be one of Noguchi's most favoured pieces of design that he was able to achieve in his life. And I think he died in 88, didn't he? Yes. So there's no point in thinking about him to go and meet. Everyone's familiar with the Akiri lighting system for bedside illumination to read books at night, or this brilliant scheme for transportable light fittings, which are rice paper and bamboo, that I must have bought 20 of in my life because they're a real 60s piece of design. But that's not surprising since they were done in 1951. Following on that fusion of the tradition, origami in this case, with contemporary furnishings, we've got these little stools, which certainly do have a minimal and probably a bit hard on the bum or origami expression. And I love this work that he did for the White House. In fact, I'm loving it more and more as I hear more and more about the bloody White House. You know, like, could it symbolise something or someone who's buried under there? I am not suggesting who that might be, but anyway. Noguchi got a very important commission by a corporate client in California, and in this instance what he's done, he's replaced the observable marble gravel garden with this plaza that one can walk on and experience the garden. So we're now inside that garden where he uses both grass and prismatic form along with this ancient, can I say, sort of obsession, but I'm happy to say obsession because I really enjoy it, bush rock insertion into the design, which is somewhat informal. And I think that kind of summarises it for me. We visited Li Yufan's exhibition Quiet Resonance at the Art Gallery of New South Wales with Charles and Leah last year. And I found it a really profound shift from Royanji to an expression of the coalescence of materials that are post-industrial revolution, like stainless steel, with those ancient materials. And you know, the gallery people, along with Li Yufan, must be applauded in just doing this stuff. Like, you need a front-end loader to position these rocks, and you know, just the loads that you're dealing with here. And it's called Relatum to Heaven Road. It's obscure. It's poetic. It is just delightful. And I just so enjoyed those moments. The shadow here is painted, not cast by a light. So he's a quirky bugger. You know, fantastic. Another quirky person is Tadao Ando. Ando is, you know, one of the Japanese contemporary architect gurus. And these photos I've taken from a book by Richard Parr, which is called The Colours of Ando. He started out being a boxer, so you can see he's got a pretty rugged face. And I'll tell you what, the way he treats his staff, my goodness, you know, it's just brutal. Just do it again, and do it in the next 10 minutes. Unbelievable. A conceptual sketch which suggests the formal essence of some meditative works that he's done. And essentially they're garden walls that I'm going to show you from Richard's book. They do rely on the strategic positioning of these concrete constructs, which are very beautiful in themselves, to create meditative spaces for almost corporates, and I've called it modern monastic, but minimal they surely are. I mean, to juxtapose a very beautiful piece of leather and stainless steel furniture against off-form concrete would challenge most clients. And you can see there the importance of detailing and light and texture. Fabrica, the colours of Benetton, with his circulation patterns. Very beautiful. Now, Tradi also just couldn't believe that there's no handrail anywhere in this Naoshima annex detail. But I said to her, look, it's Japan, you know, their kids are responsible there. They don't try to kill themselves all the time. But very, powerful expression of external landscape. Basic materials of water and gentle circulation. This is the temple at Awaji Island, which is, you can see there that there's the gravel of the Royanji garden, for example, and then the containment of the space, not clay walls this time, but off-form concrete. So it's very, very modern. Here's an even younger architect, Ishigami, who I'm just going to show you one example of his work because I don't know of many others, but I love what he says. I wish to think freely beyond the stereotypes of what architecture is considered to be. Okay, let's see if his work lives up to his statement, or is he bullshitting? No, he's not. Kanagawa Institute of Technology is outside, that's an hour and 40 minutes out of Tokyo. And with the help of some very clever engineering, he's draped a steel sheet over an undulating floor. Can you believe it? The program for this space is almost non-existent. And I've heard some commentary that, and I love it, that this architecture could only exist in Japan. In Australia, there'd be people walking all over the roof, they'd be graffitiing it left, right and centre, and it would be unimaginably horrible, but not in Japan. And the whole purpose of this plaza is for students to chill out. They can go and read a book, they sort of lie on the floor, which is, it's very, very generous, with punctuations both in the retaining or constraining wall, which sort of can, if the photographer's clever and waits for the moment, frame the interior. But it's a multi-purpose space. So this is a Shinto ceremony within, which has, movable parts. And so the open interior, column-free, is just a fun space for the students to be in. Wow, but this architect, there's an adjacent building also, which is full of columns, will undoubtedly turn this into a destination. Just fabulous. Another young person, I think he's in his 50s, I want to correspond with this guy, Ichikawa. He's a photographer, but he's committed to the spirituality of Shinto, and he comes from a photographic family. One thing I didn't mention about Buddhism is this idea of, and Buddhism and Zen Buddhism, is the Enzo ring, the focus of which is enlightenment, of self-realisation, and I guess we would say sort of improvement, though that sounds a bit competitive. Anyway, Ishikawa has taken his own studio, Tokonoma, and you can see there the black square of Malevich that we started with. And he's, through photographic techniques, I won't mention the PS word, he's introduced the Enzo ring, almost as it's almost moving, and you sense not only is it about enlightenment, but it is actually a light. Can you believe that this is a model? I still struggle to believe it, but I know it is. And this is a photograph to remind us of the essence of Shinto and the buildings associated with Shinto. The colour purple is I don't want to say regal, but it's of high virtue. And the pathway of life that surrounds that shrine is pretty amazing. Ishikawa is very aware of Japanese traditions and history, and this is his self-confessed homage to Pines in the Mist. Of all his work, this is the one I really love. Can you imagine taking this highway tunnel sometime in the evening? I don't know how he did it, but I just love the outcome. You know, is it minimal? Well, traffic-wise at least. But the language of the lighting, for me, certainly places it in that genre. Japan's Shinkansen, they're the sexiest beast on the track. You know, you just want to go up to them and stroke them. Interestingly, conceived in '39, first opened in '64 for the Olympics, and the aerodynamic engineering behind it gives rise to this sleek form. And honestly, it's the closest thing to flying on land, though I'm sure the Chinese are going to trump them again. The Nozomi, when it goes through a railway station, everything shudders and everyone laughs because it's just so hideously fast. I think I want to finish on some photos that I took in Hokkaido. I deliberately took myself out into a snowstorm, and you don't have to go very far before you start to feel a bit lost to get this sense of Hasegawa's Pines in the Mist. And there's a Japanese word called shinshin, or two words, shinshin, which is onomatopoeic. And it's the sound of snow falling gently, not in a storm. And there is definitely a sound, because I walked out into this snowfield on my own, and I don't know, I think I had a dream of doing this many, many, many years ago, and I felt like, okay, I've done it. And it is the end of the talk. I hope I haven't gone on too long, I've got no idea. But it was just a most fabulous experience. So Shin, that's when I'm nearly lost, and I hope I haven't put anyone to sleep.